have the second speech after the break, and that is by Dr. Nicolic-Brancovic. You're there, okay. The same structure, also questions and answers after the third one. Do you have a PowerPoint also?
I do, and
okay.
I also have a video, so
Thank you.
Set that up.
Ja.
Even kijken, deze doet het ook. Yes, can everyone hear me? Yes, very good, very good. Well, thanks everyone for joining this symposium today. And I will be speaking today about Serbia, between East and West. I have named my presentation because I find that Serbia is currently within this stage between East and West. Why? I will explain, of course, why I think that's the case. It's a case which has been mentioned before, of course, but I will focus on current events. Oh, this is not working, so I need to... I will do it. No, I will just use the laptop. So before I go into matters, I would really like to take you along, to present an overview with looking at these maps, because it's very important also to look at the historical overview. If we look at the map during the Cold War, of course, in the other presentations it was already mentioned, the blocks were divided between East and West. But my interest is, of course, the Yugoslavia part at that time was in between. And it was actually, if we look at this map as well, it was not a neutral country, but it was a non-alignment country. And what does that mean, the non-alignment movement? It was a movement established the end of the 50s by Yugoslavia itself with other partners, and actually as a counterbalance to these both blocks, so between the East and the West, which I find very interesting if we look, for example, at this map. This is a current map of all the NATO members. Some of them have recently applied as a result of the Ukrainian war, of course, such as Sweden and Finland. And if we look again at the bit part where the former Yugoslavia was, and I'm referring then to Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, we see that these countries are not yet NATO member, which of course has to do, referring to Serbia, has to do with NATO bombing of '99. But it's quite interesting if we look at the neutral countries versus the members, but also the fact that most of the countries that are NATO member are also EU member states. And let's have a look at the EU perspectives from the Western Balkans. I think this is a very clear picture of all the Western Balkan countries. Some of them have already joined, of course, the European Union. Some of them are having accession talks, such as Serbia, as well as Montenegro and several other countries will apply for membership. Well, North Macedonia, here's said, but it's North Macedonia now. And Albania will start also accession talks for EU membership with Bosnia. That will remain to be seen. And I understood also Kosovo will apply for membership at the end of this year. So it's quite interesting if we look at the maps from during the Cold War, and then now if we look at the NATO membership and also the EU member states, just to have an overview what the position is actually for Serbia, because I'm going to talk to you about Serbia, of course. Well, its foreign policy is very much, I would say, based on three pillars if we look at Serbian-Russian cooperation, because I'm interested in how we can understand this pro-Russian relationship. And we can see actually three pillars or three factors which are very interesting for as pull factors, I would say, for pro-Russia. And these are based on these three elements. So we have the historical, cultural elements, the relations, the brotherly relations, which are quite often used as an argument for this relationship. Of course, we have the matter of the issue of Kosovo, and we have, the economic influence that Russia is trying to gain within the Western Balkans, and in particular within Serbia. And that relates actually to the energy relations of both countries. I'm not going to talk about the whole historical overview, because there are many examples, of course, to find within history, but I want to touch upon some examples from history which will illustrate that actually that will be my statement, that both countries, that their relationship is not that close if we look at historical relations, but that they both really moved separate pathways. And that's why I also showed you the first map during the Cold War, where we really see that the former Yugoslavia at that time was not part of either the East or the West. It was Tito who actually said that I don't want to be aligned with the Soviet bloc, which at that time was possible, of course, for him to establish also the non-alignment movement. So you see also from history that they have actually gone their separate pathways. There are several other examples. We can also think of, for example, the Yugoslav War in the 90s, of course, when Russia actually imposed sanctions on Yugoslavia at that time. We can also see that during the 2000s that the Serbian government was more pro-Western oriented. We can also see this during, for example, if we go back into history, the Obrenović dynasty, which ruled between 18th and 19th century, that they were more pro-Austrian at that time. And then the Karađorđević was more pro-Russian at that time. Oriented. So we see also, which is quite interesting, I find, not only today, but you see also a bit of a balancing act between the East and the West from historical perspective. But what I'm also interested in is the current relation, because we see that since, I would say, around the last decade, we see a sort of opportunistic or intensifying relationship between Russia and Serbia. And that has to do with several factors. That has to do with the economic relationship, which I will touch upon later, the energy relationships between these two countries. That also has to do with military and defense cooperation. For example, Serbia has received from Russia battle tanks, air defense missile system as well, and they're intensifying their cooperation, which is interesting, well, because Serbia is, of course, military neutral in that sense, and they're also performing some joint military drills, called also under the umbrella of the Slavic Shield. So there are different current events happening. Well, and the latest event is, of course, the sanctions, not to choose to impose sanctions on Russia with respect to the Ukrainian war. So we see a bit of a more of an intensifying relationship of, or I would say rather a cooperation between Russia and Serbia. And I forgot to mention about this which I mentioned here above on the presentation. So Bog visoko, Rusija daleko, which actually means it's pretty far from us. So God is high and Russia is far away. And I find it a very interesting because I would actually portray the relationship as well between Russia and Serbia with this proverb which I found. The other one which we've seen, so this is the historical, which I just touched upon. We also have the cultural background, which is quite interesting as well. Well, this is a picture which you can see in Belgrade. Well, there are a lot of murals, of course, to be found, and also Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov from Russia, he also mentioned that, well, the Serbs and the Russians were brothers forever and were united, against mutual enemies. And I think this is also very important how it's framed from the Russian side, and that's why I wanted to show you also the NATO map, because if you look at according to Russia, Serbia is seen as like a fellow victim. It's surrounded around all these NATO member states. They don't have nuclear weapons, so they cannot defend themselves. So that's a bit how they actually have a sort of victimhood which they share together. And I've mentioned here, which I also found interesting in one of publications of Miloš Crnjanski, which was a Serbian writer and poet and diplomat as well, about this passage, a veteran who's within a war, and presenting Russia as this idealized country with infinite opportunities, with this orthodoxy homeland, is this supermodel which will like a savior to us. So I found it very interesting because this is a narrative which is used and which can also intensify as well. That's a bit about the historical and the current events. One of the other factors, the pull factors, is of course the situation in Kosovo. As you all know, as you all probably know, Kosovo has declared independence, but this is not recognized by Serbia. So its continued support is an important factor for Serbia to remain relations with Russia. Because they, of course, allow the debate on the international level. They are, of course, a member of the United Nations Security Council and can veto. So this is also one of the reasons. I've found some quotes from previous, but also from now. What, for example, Mr. Vladimir Putin has said about the situation, which I found also very interesting. But you can also see during, I think, Nico also mentioned the situation in Kosovo now, which is happening regarding the license plates, where the Serbian foreign ministry, the Russian, foreign ministry also is trying to add a bit of fuel on the situation. As you see, they're trying to eject ethnic Serbs. So you see also harsher words between Kurti from the Kosovo side and Vucic from the Kosovo. I even read in one article, Mr. Vucic was presented as Mr. Little Putin and Mr. Kurti as Mr. Little Zelensky. So you see that it's quite harsh from both sides, which is very worrying, of course, from that perspective. I know they're having talks at this point. And there were talks in Brussels, which were not so successful, and now even the US has stepped up and sent one of their envoys together with the EU envoy to find a solution, because there has to be a solution before the 1st of September, which is next week. So remains to see how that will end up. And I talked about energy relations, the energy dependence, which is not only an issue for Serbia, but for Serbia it's a bigger issue because it's almost fully dependent on energy, fossil fuels from Russia. Lately, they also they received a contract with Russian. Gas suppliers, of course, for the next 3 years. And I found there was a research done by Professor Goran Nikolic for the Journal of the Serbian Ministry of Finance to illustrate that the trade between Russia and, because this is also an argument which is often taken, there's a lot of trade between Russia and Serbia, but also between China and Serbia. And there were polls also, for example, within Serbia, where Serbian citizens believe that most of the trade is done with China or with Russia, which in reality is not true. And this statistic is very useful and So you see the imports and the exports, the figures are not that spectacular. And if we talk about the imports, it's mostly related to oil and gas, of course. And for the exports, it's mostly related to agricultural products. So, and what I also found interesting is that Nice is the gas, the oil supplier, gas and oil supplier for the oil company in Serbia, which the main one of the main shareholders is Gazprom. So it's also interesting to for their energy dependence relations. Well, so as we see, these are the pull factors from the Russian side, from Serbia towards the Russian side, but we see in reality this balancing act also towards the European Union, which also was touched upon. And I want to talk to you a bit about this balancing act because it is necessary, and one simple factor is that it's geographically and economically more tied to the European Union. Geographically, we've seen it on the map, it's based, well, in the Western European hemisphere, but also economically, the trade, I mean, the largest donor is the European Union. And I have some statistics on how much that is. So, and on the second place, I believe it's Germany and the US and China and Russia are nothing in, not even on top 5. So the energy relations, which I touched upon, is quite important for them to keep on balancing because at this stage there is no, at this moment there are not a lot of alternatives. Well, it's the same debate that we're having in Western Europe, of course, with respect to energy. And what is also quite important, I think, to look into, if we look at the balancing act, is the public opinion in Serbia. Well, this was a survey conducted by European Council for Foreign Relations, and the question above was, thinking about the countries below, which of the following best reflects your view on who they are to Serbia? And you see that Russia is on the first place as an ally, which I think it's really related to, you know, the historical, cultural, the brotherly nations argument. And this is also the last, I would say, last 5 years, which I found in the statistics. And we see the European Union that it's a necessary partner for 11%. But also interested, this was a poll recently done in June from Demonstrat about the opinion of political leaders. You know, they did an opinion poll on political leaders internationally, but also locally, and I found these interesting for the international political leaders. So we see that Mr. Vladimir Putin, 40% highly rated, compared to Xi Jinping, 12%, Emmanuel Macron, which is 11%, and the Bundeskanzler of Germany, Olaf Scholz, for 5%. This is quite interesting because this is, of course, also something to take into consideration also for the EU, because, of course, you have to deal with international politics, but this is on a domestic level as well. So I want to take you back to 2021, the public opinion. This is for the whole Balkans, but you see that also in Serbia, people found it a good thing to become a member of the European Union. And why do I show this? Because I need to go to the video. I think I can, where is it this one? No, this one. I'm going to show you. Okay.
For the first time in the last 2 decades, the number of Serbians who are against joining the European Union is higher than those who support it. According to research by the Ipsos agency, 44% of citizens are against membership, while 35% are in favour. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić said the findings are similar to the mood in the ruling Serbian Progressive Party.
I believe that Serbia has a place in the European Union. I believe that we should continue our European path and that we should fight for our dignified path to Europe. We should keep our independence in decision making at least until we become a member of the EU.
The results come as the European Parliament said it regretted that Serbia did not comply with EU sanctions against Russia, and a series of reports said the country is not doing enough to promote European values.
My opinion is that the research, just as it is with this narrative, was pleased to investigate the effects of the potential decision of the Serbian government to impose sanctions on Russia and accept all the restrictive measures imposed by the EU on Russia.
According to experts, the decline in support for EU membership will intensify the Serbian foreign policy dilemma and influence the orientation of the future Serbian government.
Yeah, so I wanted to show you first the statistics from 2021, because it was for a long time, people were, they found it a good thing, EU membership. And you see now, and this has also to do with, first, also the war in Ukraine, of course, which you see. And also, I would say that the EU definitely has failed within this region, not only in Serbia, but also in other Western Balkan countries, to really pull, as Russia is doing and China is doing, for example, in this region, towards themselves. So this is interesting. Some other polls very quickly, which I found interesting as well, recently done. Should Serbia align its foreign policy with the EU? So you see also 56% which says no, also not to align its foreign policy with the EU, which is consistent also with their foreign policy pillars, which I talked about briefly. Regarding Kosovo, because this is of course a blocker, should Serbia recognize Kosovo to be able to progress as a country, was the question. Also a big no, 64%. So this is something that the EU also needs to be aware of, which they are, of course, with the dialogue. Regarding NATO is also an interesting statistic. I also showed you the map. 88.1% says no, 44.3% says yes, and this, of course, has to do with the fact that in 1999 was the NATO bombing against Serbia. Regarding sanctions, so this was recently done. We see that the public opinion is still a no, and this is, of course, also we see that in the government that also is against sanctions. So what now? It's a very difficult question because it's a very, I would say, a confusing foreign policy, and that also, we can see that also in the public opinion, it is confusing. Also, that has not only to do with the confusing foreign policy of the Serbian government, but it also has to do with the fact that the EU is the accession process is confusing. It takes a long time. It's not clear why this country, why doesn't this country apply, etc. So it's confusing from both sides. And I found this also interesting as a conclusion with the question, yes, should Serbia attain its neutral position? And also 81%, which is, it was a survey of around, I think about between 1,000 and 1,100 people. So it's quite a large survey which has been conducted. So I would like to conclude with this one for now, because I don't have any minutes left, and I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions later on.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It certainly will lead to a number of comments and questions.